Welcome to toy-polloi. Parental guidance. This video contains scenes of Lego destruction.
Hello and welcome to another episode from toy-polloi. Now today we're going to take a look at fixing and restoring this vintage Star Wars laser pistol, or Han Solo's blaster as I like to call it. Now this was a toy I had as a child and sadly I don't know where it went, so recently at a toy fair I picked this up and it needs a little bit of work to get it back to sort of how it should be originally, and I think everything on it should be quite easily fixable. As you can see, this has been played with quite a lot. It's a fairly dirty toy. There's quite a lot of grime and stuff sort of in all of the nooks and crannies, so we need to give everything a good clean. It's also missing one of these knobs that hold the battery compartment in place, so we need to make a replacement for that. I've also not actually tested this yet, so I don't even know if the mechanism works. I think that really is the first thing we're going to do, is give it a try. So I've got a couple of C-size batteries here and we can just drop those in place and we'll give it a test, see if it actually works. So I'm going to put the side cover back on. Now it should be that we press both buttons together, I think, if I remember rightly. Yeah, and it does make a noise. I did have a recollection that there was a sort of speed changing option, that you could press one of these buttons and the speed would change slightly, but I suppose it does actually work. If I pull the trigger sort of less or more, you get a slightly different pitch. I'll just do that one more time. I think all that is you're pushing the little lever onto the, there's a sort of gear on a motor inside here, and you're just pushing a lever onto that gear to make a sort of really quite nasty screeching sound. So it does all appear to work, so that's pretty good news. But we are still going to take this apart anyway, because I want to clean these screws. They're a bit rusty and there's certainly some bits of dirt that need cleaning, so I think we will just take the whole thing apart to start with. So let's get the screws out and the gun apart and see what it looks like inside. So first I'll do the battery compartment, so I'm just going to take that cover off, and I'm also going to take off the little sort of knob part there, and that's what we're going to recreate later on. I have an idea how we can do that. So first thing is to give it a clean and give all of this a bit of a clean, so you can see that is quite filthy. So we'll take everything apart and take the batteries out. And now it's a case of removing a whole load of screws. There's a good few screws, at least 8 all around. So I've just got a Phillips screwdriver here and we can unscrew those. And then I have a little pot here to put them all in so we don't get lost. Looks like some of these screws are different sizes, so it's worth remembering which ones go where. That forward screw is a smaller one, and then there's a larger screw at the back, so I'm just going to remember which ones go where. I can always refer back to this video if I forget. Actually looks like most of these are larger screws. Yeah, they are. So maybe it's just that front screw there that is the smaller size. Yes, it is. That makes it very easy to remember. Just that front screw is a different size. So now that all those are removed, we can see how easily this comes apart. I'm hoping it will just sort of pull apart. Just going to get a knife or something, or maybe I can just do it with my fingernails, just to prise open these last few bits. Yeah, there you go. And there we go, and you can see there's a few bits inside that have now fallen apart, but I think we can easily work out where those go back. I've just put everything back in the sort of correct places so you can see how it would go and how the whole system works. It's a very nice simple system, like a lot of old Star Wars toys. It just uses a motor and a couple of switches, so it's a very simple thing. So you have a motor here which has, as I say, a gear on the top of it, or sort of like a little ridged gear, and when you pull the trigger you're pulling this tiny sheet of plastic down onto the gear, and that's what makes the buzzing noise. And the back of the lever also pushes up this little copper plate to touch onto this other sort of, the other end of the wire that comes out of the motor. And that makes the circuit. And then when you press this button at the bottom, you're connecting at the end of the other piece of this copper plate onto this metal piece, which is the end contact for the battery. So the two batteries go between here. So it is incredibly simple. So really, yeah, all you're doing is you're pushing those two bits of metal together with that finger, and then you're pushing these two bits of metal together with that finger, and moving the plastic with the trigger. So it is incredibly simple, but lovely the way it sort of all works. So I'm actually going to remove all of this now so that we can wash everything without having to worry about getting any of this sort of damp. So that piece just slides out nice and easily. The piece at the top there does slide out as well. And that motor's not actually held in with anything, so we can pull that out. I'm hoping I can just push that underneath that little piece of plastic. Oh, actually it's fine because the trigger comes out. So that comes out. We can then take this piece of metal out. That's the motor removed. And then we're just left with the little button. And then this is all plastic, which means I can now go and give this a good wash in some hot soapy water, and I don't have to worry about anything getting sort of wet that shouldn't be getting wet. So that's really easy and useful. Likewise, the other side of the gun has nothing on it, so that can be washed fully, apart from these little stickers, which I just sort of carefully wash around so that they don't get damaged. But I will make a recreation of this file in case your blaster doesn't have these stickers on it. So let's go and get all of this washed. I'm going to wash it in just some hot soapy water, get into all the grooves and sort of get as much dirt out as I can, and then we can come back and start working on some of the other bits. We need to clean these screws and then also make a replacement one of these. So let's first up get everything washed up. The hot soapy water did a pretty good job of getting most of the grime off. There's a few sticky patches that I will remove with some lighter fluid later on, but for the most part it's certainly cleaned up very nicely. And while we're waiting for that to dry, we can get on with sorting out these screws. Now you can see these screws have just gone a little bit rusty. Most of them are actually not too bad. That one's fairly reasonable. There's a couple that have got a bit of rust on them. So for that we're just going to use some white vinegar. I've got a little bit of white vinegar in this pot here. And all I'm going to do is drop the screws into that and leave them for sort of half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and then I should be able to wipe off the rust just with a paper towel. Then I'll give them a good wash just to make sure there's no sort of residue left on them, and maybe just a squirt with some WD-40 so they're a little bit sort of oiled up, and those can go back on the toy at the end. My plan for making this dial part is to actually sort of cast and recreate this whole top section using blue stuff and milliput. Now I've shown you blue stuff before in a few videos. This is a thermoplastic. You heat it up in just boiled water and it melts, and you can then push sort of shapes and things into it, and it will make a sort of perfect mould of them, which you can then use something like milliput to cast in. So we're just going to use that to start with. You don't need to use a huge amount of it. I bought this pack a while back. I think the pack cost me £10, and you get 8 strips of the blue stuff. I think here is about 2 or 3 strips of it all melted together, and you can reuse it as many times as you like. You just have to sort of heat it up each time. So first thing to do is let's make the mould, and then we can cast this in it. And the back part of it I'm going to use some Lego to recreate this so it's nice and strong, because milliput has a tendency to sort of be a bit brittle if you sort of push on it too much. So it'll be fine for making a large area like this, but I think this back section, a piece of Lego will do just as good a job. So let's get the mould made. I'm going to warm this up in some boiled water, and then we can sort of remould it. And I use a pot like this just because it means that you can push the blue stuff into it and then push your whatever you're casting into it nice and firmly, and the edges of this sort of hold the blue stuff in place. So getting a little pot like that is quite useful. So first up we've got to warm this up, so I'm going to put the kettle on and get this melted. So the kettle has just boiled. I'm going to pour some boiling water into there and drop in the blue stuff, and we'll just let that warm up for a few minutes. The blue stuff's been in for a few minutes, so let's take this out. It should have melted quite a lot and it's gone very soft, so we can sort of reshape this a bit. I'm just going to fold it over a few times, push this into my little pot, make sure it's nice and flat everywhere around the edges, and I'm going to get the little dial and we can push that quite firmly into the blue stuff. And I want this actually to sort of slightly go over the edge, so that I've got a little guide for where I'm going to put the milliput. So make sure everything is sort of as flush as you can. You can always trim the blue stuff with a knife if it's sort of in the wrong areas, and then melt it back together at a later date. Okay, that feels pretty good. It's quite sort of forgiving, and if you go wrong you can always just reheat it and do it again, so don't worry if things don't work the first time. I think that feels just about right. I also want to make a sort of note of which way this little dial, the sort of little peg on the inside is working, so I'm going to make a mark in one side of the mould, just so that I know that when I'm making my replacement piece out of Lego that it's going to face in this direction. I think that was good enough, so we're just going to let that cool off, and then we can start working on the sort of inner piece and moulding it in milliput. It's worth letting the blue stuff harden completely, so let it go quite cool. You could actually put it in the fridge if you wanted it to sort of harden quicker, but for now I can sort of wait, because I'm going to start recreating this little tab on the back, and to do that we're going to use some Lego. Now there's a piece of Lego which I think is called a ladder or a fence. It's a sort of strange piece that you can clip them together, sort of one onto the other, and I picked these up a while back for doing another project, and I thought these would actually work quite well, because we can cut off one corner to make a little sort of hook shape, which is exactly what's missing on the top there. And the actual sort of the stem part of the hook, if we look there, is quite thick. It just so happens it's as thick as one of these little axle pegs that I've used again previously, and because this is Lego, everything fits onto everything else, so we can easily sort of put one piece on top of another piece. So I'm going to use this to recreate this little hook, and again all it requires is a pair of plastic nippers. I can sort of measure this roughly. What I want to do is actually sort of sink part of this into some milliput, so I just need to sort of measure roughly how far that's going to go down, and I think really if I just chop off this top section just with a pair of plastic nippers, you can see I can make something quite quickly that will do the job. And this doesn't need to be particularly neat because it's all sort of hidden inside, but I want to make something that will work roughly. So I think that's about as far as it needs to go down. Make sure that still hooks on there, which it does. And I'm going to cut off this corner piece as close to the corner as I can, like that. I think that top one, oh yeah, look, that's a pretty perfect match. So we can use this to make a little hook. So again, I'm just going to cut off the bottom, so we've got an L shape. If I put this all together, you can see I can make something like that, which is actually going to be a reasonable match to it, and we can embed that into the milliput, and that will work nicely. So I'm just going to sort of tidy this up a little bit more, just do a bit of finessing on it so it doesn't look quite so rough around the edges. And in that time the blue stuff should have cooled down and we can start making the milliput. The blue stuff has now had time to go cool, and you can see that's quite a nice mould there. You can see all of the details of the little button there. It looks pretty good. So just check that my little hook has made to about the right size, because I want it to sort of go quite far into the milliput, because although this button is really going to be sort of ornamental, it would be nice if it actually worked sort of almost, and I think this will just about. So you can see the two bits of Lego about the right sort of thickness for the plastic pole there, and it's going to be about the right height once I've sort of pushed that into the milliput. So now what we can do is get some milliput ready and push that into this mould and make it as neat as we possibly can. The reason I do this in a little plastic pot is that I can then push this in, and I can push everything in quite firmly, and the blue stuff doesn't have sort of chance to move about too much, which means that you get a much better sort of casting. It's, you know, just one of those things I've learned with practice, really, that have a little sort of play around, and you'll see what works best for you, but this is the way I found works best. So let's get some milliput made up, and we'll cast a new little button. So I've got my milliput here. It's a 2-part epoxy, so you cut sort of equal measures of each out and then mix them together. This milliput is actually getting a bit old, so it may not work too well, but you don't want to sort of chuck stuff away. It should mix up with a little bit of effort, and I'm sure given it 24 hours it will set. But as you can see, the actual sort of the hardening stuff is starting to go off. I've had this set quite a long time, so it might be time for me to buy a new pack. And milliput does come in multiple colours. This is the yellow grey. It doesn't actually matter in this instance because I'm going to be painting this anyway, but you can buy a grey mix. There's a few other colours as well. But in this instance, it doesn't matter at all. We're just sort of making a shape that we're going to paint to match the sort of metallic grey of the original little knob there once we're all done. So make sure it's all fully mixed. I give it a real thorough going over so that it's mixed as well as it possibly can be. So that's now well mixed. There's a few little sort of fiddly areas on this casting. The little sort of peg that comes out the front side, I want to make sure that there is milliput in that, so I'm just going to take a very small piece of milliput, just like that, and then push that in into that hole so that we know that that's definitely sort of been cast. You can actually see through the blue stuff to make sure everything has gone in and it's sort of filled up. And also then this little raised dash, I want to make sure that is filled as well. So again, just take a small piece of that, I can push that in just to make sure that it really is covered, and hopefully I should be able to see that through the bottom. Yeah, there we go. And then we can now take all the rest of it, and I'm going to push this in just sort of by hand all around the edges to make sure that we've got all of the little details. Now I can build up the middle section. And once this is dry, once the milliput goes off, you can actually sort of file it and shape it. So I'm going to try and get it as close as I can to sort of being flat and finished. But obviously there'll be a bit of fine tuning once this is all set. So that's that bit. Now we can take the piece of Lego that I've made, and we see where the mark is, and so I know which way around it's going to go. I'm going to push that into the milliput. This may or may not work. This is the first time I've tried this, but you've got to have a go at these things. I can push the milliput in around. Just use a screwdriver, and once it's set, this should all go pretty firm, and you shouldn't be able to remove the bit of Lego at all. There might be a little bit too much milliput in there, but we'll test. If it doesn't work, I'll make another one. There we go, that's what I'm going to leave it as. And we'll let that set. That takes about 24 hours to go off, so we'll let that set, and then we can sort of fine tune it a bit. While waiting for the milliput to dry, I noticed there was one other sort of slight area of damage, which probably doesn't affect many people, but I noticed it on here, was this little tab. There should be a little peg, as you can see there. It just pokes up, which is what the dial sort of rests against. That has snapped off, so I'm just going to carefully replace it with a piece of Lego. I think that should work quite nice. It's the same sort of plastic. So I think all I'm going to do is actually just trim that off with a pair of plastic nippers. So I've got a pair of plastic nippers here. And I reckon I can probably just trim this plastic down. Yeah, it seems to sort of cut quite nicely. And then I'm going to drill a hole and I'll just insert a little bit of Lego just so that there is a tab there, so it looks sort of more complete. I don't think most people would even notice that this was broken, but as I'm completing this, I might as well do everything I possibly can. So just sort of trim that down. I could just glue it on the surface, but I think if I drilled a hole and poke that through, that would be a bit stronger. So I'm just going to go and do that. It won't take 5 minutes, and that should just look a little bit more complete. So there you go, there's a 3mm hole just drilled in the side there. This is the little Lego aerial, I think this is the one antenna that I'm going to use. And that should now push through that hole. It does have such a nice firm fitting, and I can push that out, so we've now got a little tab there again that the knob can sort of rest on when you rotate it round. I think that's going to work quite nicely, and that's a nice firm fix. If you were just to glue something onto the top, it would just snap off again, so you really want to sort of try and make something that's pretty firm. I'm just trying to work out how high that should go out. Looks like it's about that. So I'll get some plastic nippers. I'm going to just roughly cut this off because it's all hidden inside. And then I'll drop a little bit of super glue just around the edge there just to hold that in place. But that is nice and firm and should work a treat. It's now a day later, and you can see this is how the little latch mechanism has come out. After about 4 hours of letting the milliput go off, I actually took this out of the mould because it's fairly solid by that point, and then took a scalpel and just sort of trimmed down the back of it, because obviously I pushed quite a lot of milliput in and it was actually a little bit raised. So just before it's set fully, if you can get a knife and sort of cut it off, that's actually quite an easy way of doing it. So you can see I've ended up with quite a nice sort of flat back there. If we compare this to the original one, they're looking really good. They're very similar. The casting works perfectly this time. If we turn them over, you can see the Lego backing. Again, that has also worked very well. So let's give this a quick test on the gun. And then I'll take this outside and give it a bit of a spray paint and see if we can get a sort of similar match on colour. But first, let's give it a test. So here's the side of the gun. This is the original one. Now these you can just sort of pop in like so, and that will rotate round. And as you can see, that actually fits onto the little bit of Lego that I put in there pretty well. Now we get the one that I've made, we'll drop that in, we can turn that around, and you can see that works as well. So by the time that is painted up, I think you'll be hard pushed to tell that that isn't an original one of these latches. So yeah, I think a quick coat of spray paint. I've got some old rattle cans outside in various colours. I'm sure I've got one that's a near enough grey to this. If I haven't, then I may mix up some Humbrol paints and make something that's a sort of similar shade. Earlier versions of this blaster actually had black ones of these, so if you got the black versions, then that would be much easier to do. And you can see that this grey plastic has a slight sort of sparkle to it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to recreate that, but I'll certainly get something as close as I can. So let's get a bit of spray paint on that, and we'll see how that looks. I gave the latch a coating of a grey Humbrol spray paint that I had, and that was actually a pretty good match in tone. But to try and match the sort of slight flecks of silver that are in this original one, I just gave it a very light dusting of a silver Tamiya spray that I have. And as you can see, that's given it a little bit of a sparkle, actually possibly too much of a sparkle, but from a distance these do match quite nicely. I could have actually just given a little bit of a spray to that one, but I want to keep that one all original. So you can see that is a fairly reasonable match now. I think most people wouldn't notice that that wasn't an original one. It's quite a nice little sparkly finish that. I maybe should have sort of toned it down a bit, but I'm pretty pleased with that. So I think that's what we're going to go with. And I'm going to put these back onto the gun. So now we're at a stage where we can actually put the whole gun back together and check that it works. Now we can put all the bits straight back into the gun. So first of all, I'm just going to unclip the trigger mechanism there, because we've got to take this little motor, and the motor has two wires on it, one with a battery connector to it and a blue wire with a little loop on it, and so that has to go under the trigger piece of plastic like so, and hooked into a little space there, and then we can pull that red wire around and that hooks onto these two bits of plastic, these two little pegs here, and that goes over the top of that. And then the blue connector, there's a little peg just behind the trigger, and that has to hook onto there. Hook that down, and then we can put the trigger back in place. Now we have two bits of metal. Now this piece of metal, the curved bit at the top, that is the battery connector. So again, there are little pegs all the way down the inside, and we have to hook this little metal tab over the top of those top two pegs and under that peg there, and that goes in that position. And then there is a brass piece, and this again is part of the trigger mechanism, and that needs to hook just behind the trigger. And again, there are little metal tabs to hold it all in place. You can see there's a little metal tab there and one there, and that holds it in place. So then you've got the trigger pushes up that part of the metal onto the little blue tab, and then there's the final little button that goes into this part, and when you press that, that pushes the copper plate onto the other battery connector there. So it's all fairly straightforward. Now we can then get the other half of the gun, and we can drop that over the top and push it all together, and then we just have to turn it over and put the screws back in. And if you remember, there were some slightly different screws. We had one smaller screw. So here are the screws that I've dipped in vinegar. They've had all of the rust removed, and I've given them a good wash, and I've also sprayed them with a little bit of WD-40 just so they shouldn't rust again. So that is the small screw, and the small screw went in the front of the scope. I'm just going to drop that one in there, and then all of the other screws were larger sizes, and those go in all of the other holes. So we'll get this all screwed together and we can give it a test. So I've screwed the gun back together. I put a couple of batteries in. We can take the side panel here and put that on. Now if your gun is missing these stickers, I have spent some time in Photoshop and recreated the Empire Strikes Back version of this sticker, and I'll put this available for download for free off toy-polloi.com, and all you'll need to do is to print that out onto some glossy sticky backed paper and then cut that out and stick that on. That should look just as good as new. So now we can test out the little latches for the final time. So that is the original latch. I'm going to drop that in place and rotate it round, and as you can see, I'm really quite pleased with that little bit of Lego there. That's done a perfectly good job, and once everything's in place you could hardly tell that that is a little Lego antenna there, but it works nicely, and it means that you can't rotate that latch too far round. Then we can take the other latch, which is the one I've made out of milliput, and we'll put that in the other end. Just make sure that clicks in place, and we can also rotate that round. You don't want to rotate this one too harsh, because obviously the milliput is slightly weaker than that original plastic, but it certainly doesn't look too bad. I think most people wouldn't even notice that that wasn't an original latch. That's a really nice sort of finish there. And of course the important thing that we need to do is actually to test the gun. So I've got some batteries in. We can press that button and pull the trigger, and it should make a laser sound. So it does, that's all working again, and back to being an original gun that you could quite happily fight the evil Empire with. Now, as this is one of my grail items, I thought it would be really nice to try and rebox it, and very kindly Darren from replicatorboxesandinserts.com has sent me one of his reproduction boxes for the Empire Strikes Back version of the laser pistol, which I have here. It's just arrived. So let's get and open this. I've got a knife here, and I'm going to cut the tape on the side of the box. We should be able to get into this and see how it looks. Now, I've had boxes before from Replicator Boxes and Inserts, and they've been very nice, really good quality sort of reproductions, and I'm hoping to get the same here on this one. So as you can see, it's very nicely packed. we can pull out the paper, and you can see the box is well packed on the inside, and it comes with all the bits you need. You can see the cable ties there that hold the weapon in place. I'll just move this box out of the way, put those 2 cable ties aside. They are taped on so they don't get lost. One there, and one there, and then we can open up the rest of this. I'll get the box out. Like so, and there is a Empire Strikes Back box for this laser pistol, and there is a cardboard insert inside which said is put in the wrong way around just for transport. So if I can get that out, you can see there should be a red background. Now these boxes are printed onto archival quality paper and are sort of hand done reproductions. They are hand cut, and they are also clearly marked, which I know a lot of people worry about with reproduction boxes, but you can see here on this backing card it says made by Replicator Boxes, and also if we look here you can see it very clearly marked on the back, and I'm sure there are other markings as well, because I know that he makes a point of putting those on, so it's fairly obvious that this is a reproduction. You can actually see it there, made by Replicator Boxes. But the quality of them is very nice. The print is lovely, and they do feel pretty sturdy, and really do look the part. So let's get this laser pistol all boxed up and see what it looks like as though it was new off the shelf. So here is the backing card, and this is what we need the cable ties for. You'll see there are a couple of holes, and that's how the gun was actually held in place. So we have to place it sort of over the backing board and then thread these cable ties through and tie them onto the back. So I'm just going to do that quickly before we put it into the box. Nice easy process. I'll just get those, just twist them around a couple of times, and we'll do the same with the one on the handle. Make sure everything's in the right place. Like so. It's already looking pretty smart. Now I've actually just put the gun back in the box slightly off camera just because it's a little bit more fiddly when you have a camera in the way, but as you can see that is looking really nice. Now these Empire Strikes Back boxes are actually taped together. There should be little bits of tape on these corners. I'm not actually going to tape this one because it's sort of holding in place quite nicely, but I do actually have some little sort of circular disc bits of sellotape that I've used for something else. I'll just show you here. These are little discs of sellotape, and these would be quite good to use. You can see there you just get one single disc just to tape them down if you didn't want to tape it with sellotape. But as I say, for the moment I'm actually going to leave this untaped because I think it looks really nice. So that's it for this restoration. As you can see, the end result, it does look lovely, and this is going to be something that I can proudly display here at toy-polloi, and is an item that I've wanted for a very long time. The box really does show it off to its full extent, and it's also a lovely way of displaying this item, because otherwise it's a bit of a hard thing to sort of sit around in a collection. You just got to sort of lay it flat on the top. So the boxes do make quite a big difference. If you'd like one of these boxes, I'll put a link to replicatorboxesandinserts.com in the description for this video, and I want to say a big thank you to Darren for very kindly sending this over. I'm really pleased with how the final latches look. Now that it's in the box, you can't actually tell the difference between the two. The one on the right is the one that I made myself. I did give it a little bit of a second coat of paint just to dull down the silver speckles that I put on it, because I thought it was just a little bit too full on, but now it's in the box. It's hard to tell that that is one that has been handmade, and the box just gives you that extra little bit of sort of nostalgia value, so it's a really nice thing to have. So just a big thank you again to Joe Haynes, who very kindly sold this to me, and Darren from Replicator Boxes and Inserts for the box. It looks amazing. I hope this restoration video has been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.